HR called me in and said, 15 employees report you created a hostile work environment. I stood in the doorway of Rebecca Fallon's office at Cornerstone Media Group, holding my iPad with presentation notes for the strategy meeting I'd been about to lead, completely blindsided by what she'd just said. I'm Ian Thornwell, and I'd been the creative director at this marketing agency for 8 years, managing a team of 23 designers, copywriters, and account managers. I'd built the department from 6 people to one of the most awarded creative teams in the region. Our client retention rate was 93%. I'd won Director of the Year from the Marketing Association 2 years running. Now Rebecca sat behind her desk with our CEO, Gregory Ashford, and someone I didn't recognize, a man in his 50s wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather portfolio that screamed, corporate lawyer. Rebecca's expression was professionally sympathetic, but Gregory looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. The stranger watched me with the neutral assessment of someone paid to evaluate threats. 15 employees? I finally managed to say. That's not possible. I've never created a hostile environment. My team is the most collaborative in the company. Rebecca slid a stack of papers across her desk toward me, each one a formal complaint form with the Cornerstone logo at the top. These were filed through our anonymous reporting system over the past 10 days. The allegations include verbal abuse, public humiliation, discriminatory comments, favoritism, retaliation against employees who questioned your decisions, and creating an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. I picked up the first complaint and started reading. The document described an incident allegedly occurring 3 weeks ago during a department meeting where I'd supposedly berated a junior designer named Ashley Winters in front of the entire team, calling her work pathetic and evidence that we'd lowered our hiring standards. The problem was that incident never happened. We'd had a department meeting 3 weeks ago, and I'd given feedback on several projects, but I'd never called anyone's work pathetic or made comments about hiring standards. I was known for constructive criticism delivered privately, not public humiliation. I looked up at Rebecca and Gregory. This didn't happen. I never said these things to Ashley or anyone else. The stranger finally spoke, his voice measured and formal. Mr. Thornwell, I'm Kenneth Grayson, outside counsel retained by Cornerstone to investigate these allegations. I specialize in workplace harassment and hostile environment cases. I've been practicing employment law for 26 years, and I can assure you these complaints are being taken extremely seriously. I flipped through more forms, my hands starting to shake as I read. A complaint from someone claiming I'd made sexist remarks about female employees not being aggressive enough in client meetings. Another describing how I'd allegedly thrown a portfolio across the conference room in rage during a pitch review, nearly hitting someone. A third detailing how I'd supposedly told an employee of color that they should be grateful to work at a place that gives opportunities to people from their background. Every single allegation was horrifying, specific, and completely fabricated. My throat had gone tight. None of this is true. Not one word. I've never thrown anything in anger. Never made discriminatory comments. Never publicly humiliated anyone. This is all lies. Kenneth made a note in his portfolio. Mr. Thornwell, 15 separate individuals have come forward with remarkably consistent complaints about your management style and behavior. That level of coordination would be unusual for fabricated claims. Rebecca added her perspective, clearly following a script someone had prepared for this meeting. Ian, I know this is difficult to hear. You've been a valued member of our leadership team for a long time, but we have to take these allegations seriously, especially given their volume and specificity. Each complaint includes dates, times, witnesses, and detailed descriptions of incidents. Gregory finally spoke, his voice strained. Ian, we're placing you on immediate paid administrative leave while the investigation is conducted. You'll need to hand over your badge, laptop, phone, and building access immediately. You cannot contact any members of your team or anyone else at Cornerstone during this period. Kenneth will be conducting interviews with all complainants, witnesses, and other employees. This process typically takes 4 to 6 weeks. 6 weeks of sitting at home while my reputation was destroyed. 6 weeks of everyone at Cornerstone believing I was an abusive manager who'd created a toxic environment. I felt panic rising in my chest, making it hard to breathe normally. I need to see these complaints in detail. I need to respond to each allegation specifically. I need access to my calendar, my emails, documentation of meetings, everything that will prove these incidents didn't happen as described. Kenneth shook his head slightly. Mr. Thornwell, you'll have the opportunity to provide your version of events during your formal interview with me, which I'll schedule for later this week. For now, company policy requires that we secure all your work materials and data access. This is standard protocol in hostile workplace investigations. Rebecca's tone softened marginally. Ian, I want to believe there's an explanation, but right now, the evidence is substantial. 15 people don't typically conspire to fabricate complaints. The best thing you can do is cooperate fully with Kenneth's investigation and hope the truth emerges. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. I handed over my badge, laptop, and phone to Rebecca, feeling like pieces of my identity were being stripped away. Each item represented my work, my relationships, my standing in the company and industry. Without them, I was just a suspended employee under investigation for behavior I found morally repugnant. How long have you known about these complaints? I asked. Rebecca glanced at Kenneth before answering. The first complaint was filed 11 days ago. They've been coming in steadily since then, with the last one filed yesterday morning. We waited until we had a clear pattern before bringing you in. So for 11 days, you've been investigating me without my knowledge, letting me continue to manage my team, attend meetings, make decisions, all while building a case against me? Gregory spoke up, defensive. We had to verify the complaints were credible before disrupting operations. Kenneth advised us to gather all allegations before approaching you to avoid tipping you off and potentially tainting the investigation. That phrase, tipping you off, made me sound like a criminal they'd been surveilling. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I didn't do any of this. Every single one of these allegations is false, and I'm going to prove it. Rebecca nodded, but her expression suggested she'd already formed her opinion. That's what the investigation is for, Ian. If you're innocent, the process will show that. But her tone made clear she believed the 15 complainants, not me. Security was waiting outside Rebecca's office to escort me from the building, a humiliation that felt deliberately designed to maximize my shame. Jennifer Kang from security, someone I'd chatted with countless times in the elevator, now couldn't meet my eyes as she walked me to the parking garage. Employees I'd worked with for years watched from their desks as we passed. Some looked shocked, others looked satisfied, like they'd suspected all along that I was secretly terrible. The news had clearly spread before I'd even been called into Rebecca's office. Someone had leaked the investigation, probably intentionally, to poison opinion against me before I could defend myself. I drove home in a daze, my mind cycling through the allegations, trying to understand what was happening. 15 employees, 15 separate people claiming I'd created a hostile work environment. Who were they? Why would they lie? My wife, Carolyn, was working from home that day. She looked up from her laptop when I walked in at 10:30 in the morning, immediately concerned. Ian? What's wrong? Why are you home? I told her everything about the complaints, the investigation, the administrative leave, the allegations that I knew were false, but couldn't explain. Carolyn listened with growing alarm, her expression shifting from confusion to fear. This doesn't make sense. You're the most even-tempered person I know. You've never even raised your voice at home, let alone publicly berated employees or made discriminatory comments. This has to be a mistake. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, some administrative error, a misunderstanding that would be cleared up once Kenneth interviewed me. But 15 complaints didn't happen by accident. This was coordinated, deliberate, and sophisticated. Someone had orchestrated a campaign to destroy my career, and they'd done it carefully enough that the company believed them over me. Carolyn asked the question I'd been avoiding. Could any of this be misinterpretation? Maybe feedback you gave that someone took the wrong way? I'd been thinking about that during the drive home. I was direct in my feedback, expected high standards, and didn't coddle underperformers. But I'd never crossed the line into abuse or discrimination. I'd been through management training, understood professional boundaries, and genuinely cared about developing my team members. The allegations weren't describing tough management or blunt feedback. They were describing a monster who verbally abused people, threw things, made bigoted remarks, and ruled through fear. That wasn't me. That had never been me. I need a lawyer. Carolyn nodded immediately. She spent the afternoon researching employment attorneys while I sat at our kitchen table, trying to document everything I could remember about my management style, recent conflicts, anyone who might have a grudge against me. I'd given negative performance reviews to 3 people in the past year. I'd denied a promotion request from David Huang in the design department because his work quality didn't justify advancement. I'd pushed back against budget increases requested by the accounts team. I'd been the deciding vote against hiring someone's friend for an open position. Any of those situations could have created resentment, but enough to fabricate 15 harassment complaints? That seemed extreme and impossibly coordinated. By late afternoon, Carolyn had found an attorney named Thomas Quincy, with a firm called Quincy and Partners. His bio indicated he'd spent 15 years specializing in executive defense, wrongful termination, and employment law. He'd successfully defended dozens of clients against workplace misconduct allegations. I called his office and got an emergency appointment for the following morning. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept cycling through the allegations, the way Rebecca and Gregory had looked at me, the security escort from the building, the knowledge that everyone at Cornerstone now believed I was an abusive manager. The presumption of innocence meant nothing in workplace investigations. I was guilty until proven innocent, and maybe not even then. Even if cleared, the taint would remain. People would always wonder if the investigation had missed something, if I'd just been clever enough to hide my abuse. Thomas Quincy's office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel that somehow felt both corporate and threatening. Thomas himself was in his late 40s, with the sharp-eyed intensity of someone who'd seen every variation of workplace conflict. I told him everything, starting with that morning's meeting and working backward through my 8 years at Cornerstone. Thomas took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he sat back and studied me carefully. Mr. Thornwell, I'll be direct with you. 15 complaints is highly unusual. In my 15 years of practice, I've rarely seen legitimate hostile environment cases with more than 3 or 4 complainants. That's because genuinely abusive managers typically target specific individuals, not broad swaths of their team. 15 complaints suggests either you've been systemically terrible to everyone, which seems inconsistent with your 8-year track record and awards, or this is a coordinated effort to remove you. My money's on the latter, but we need to prove it. Thomas outlined what would happen next. Kenneth Grayson would conduct his investigation, interviewing the complainants, me, and potentially other employees. The investigation would typically take 4 to 6 weeks, as they'd said. If Kenneth concluded the allegations were credible, Cornerstone would likely terminate my employment for cause, which would disqualify me from severance and make it nearly impossible to find equivalent work in the industry. If Kenneth found the allegations unsubstantiated, I'd theoretically be reinstated, but realistically my reputation would be so damaged that staying would be untenable. Either way, my career at Cornerstone was probably over. But Thomas saw a third option. If we can prove this is a coordinated false complaint campaign, we can go on offense. Sue Cornerstone for wrongful investigation, defamation, and breach of employment contract. More importantly, we can identify who orchestrated this and go after them personally. That would require extensive investigation on our end, not just responding to Kenneth's process. Thomas recommended hiring a private investigator to examine relationships among my team members, recent conflicts, communications patterns, and anything that might reveal coordination among the complainants. He knew someone who specialized in corporate investigations, a former FBI agent named Natalie Frost, who'd transitioned to private work 5 years ago. The fees were substantial. Thomas charged $450 per hour. Natalie charged $200 per hour plus expenses. I was looking at tens of thousands of dollars to defend myself against false allegations, but my career was worth it. My reputation was worth it. The alternative was accepting destruction without fighting back. I authorized Thomas to proceed and wrote a retainer check that made me physically ill. Carolyn and I had savings, but this would devastate them. If the investigation went long, we'd need to consider selling investments or borrowing against our home equity. The injustice of paying enormous sums to prove I hadn't done things I'd never done felt crushing. Kenneth Grayson called that afternoon to schedule my formal interview for the following Monday, giving me 5 days to prepare. Thomas used that time to coach me extensively on how to respond to hostile environment allegations. Don't get defensive. Stay calm. Answer only what's asked. Provide specific counter-evidence when possible. Acknowledge that perception matters even when it's wrong. Never attack the complainants directly. Thomas also started gathering documentation. He requested my complete personnel file from Cornerstone through formal legal demand, including all performance reviews, awards, peer evaluations, and 360-degree feedback assessments. He wanted copies of my calendar for the past year, showing every meeting, every team interaction, every moment that could provide context or contradict the allegations. He wanted email archives, project files, anything that showed my actual management style and communication patterns. Carolyn helped me pull together everything I had access to from my personal backups and files. We created a timeline of the past year, marking every significant interaction with team members, every project milestone, every review cycle. Natalie Frost came to our house that Friday evening to begin her investigation. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with the methodical intensity of someone who lived for details and patterns. She'd brought a laptop and several folders of preliminary research she'd already compiled on Cornerstone's organizational structure. Walk me through your team, she instructed. Every person who reports to you, their role, their tenure, your relationship with them, any conflicts or issues. I described all 23 members of my creative department, senior designers who'd been with me for years, mid-level copywriters who were talented but sometimes struggled with deadlines, junior staff who were still learning, account managers who bridged between creative and clients. As I spoke, Natalie took notes and cross-referenced information on her laptop. She stopped me when I mentioned David Huang, the designer whose promotion I'd denied. Tell me more about him. I explained that David was technically skilled, but lacked the leadership and strategic thinking necessary for a senior role. He'd applied for promotion to senior designer 6 months ago. I'd recommended against it, and the decision had been upheld by Gregory. David had been noticeably cold toward me since then, but I'd attributed it to normal disappointment. Natalie made extensive notes. Denied promotion 6 months ago creates a strong motive. Who made the final decision? I explained that promotion decisions for my department required approval from me and Gregory. David would know I'd blocked his advancement. Natalie asked about other potential sources of resentment. I mentioned Melissa Cavendish, an account manager who'd wanted to transition into a creative role, but whom I'd told wasn't a fit. I mentioned Thomas Fletcher, a copywriter I'd given a negative performance review for missing deadlines and producing sloppy work. I mentioned Brittany Yates, a designer who'd wanted to work from home full-time, but whom I'd required to maintain office presence for collaboration reasons. Each name went on Natalie's list of potential ringleaders or motivated participants in a coordinated complaint campaign. She asked about my relationship with Rebecca Fallon in HR. Had I ever had conflicts with her? Any reason she might be biased against me? I thought carefully. Rebecca and I had disagreed about hiring decisions occasionally. She'd wanted to prioritize diversity metrics over qualifications in some cases, while I'd argued we should hire the best candidates regardless of demographics. But those were professional disagreements, not personal conflicts. Natalie made a note anyway. The interview with Kenneth Grayson happened Monday morning in a conference room at a law office Thomas rented for the occasion. Kenneth had apparently agreed to conduct the interview outside Cornerstone's offices, which Thomas saw as a small victory. The interview lasted 4 hours. Kenneth asked about each of the 15 complaints in detail, reading the allegations and asking me to respond. The complaint about berating Ashley Winters in a department meeting. I explained we'd had a meeting that day, but I'd given feedback on multiple projects privately afterward, never publicly, and had never used the words pathetic or made comments about hiring standards. Did I have proof? Only my calendar showing the meeting and my consistent pattern of giving feedback privately, which my personnel file and 360 reviews would support. The complaint about throwing a portfolio across the conference room. I explained that incident never happened, period. I'd never thrown anything in anger in my life, at work or elsewhere. Kenneth asked if anyone could verify that. I pointed out the absence of evidence was telling. If I'd thrown something in a conference room, multiple people would have witnessed it, yet apparently only one person reported it. Kenneth noted my response without indicating whether he found it persuasive. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. The complaint about making sexist remarks regarding female employees not being aggressive enough. I explained I'd never made gender-based generalizations about aggression or any other trait. I'd given specific feedback to specific employees about presentation style and client engagement, but never couched it in terms of gender. Kenneth asked if I'd ever mentioned gender in any professional context. I admitted I'd supported initiatives to recruit more women into creative leadership roles and had spoken about diversity in industry conferences, but that was advocacy, not discrimination. The complaint about telling an employee of color they should be grateful for opportunities given to people from their background. I felt anger rising as Kenneth read that one. I've never said anything remotely like that. I don't even think in those terms. That's a completely fabricated statement designed to make me sound like a bigot. Thomas placed a hand on my arm, a reminder to stay calm. Kenneth continued through all 15 complaints, each one describing behavior I found abhorrent and had never engaged in. Some allegations were about incidents I couldn't specifically remember because they'd supposedly occurred months ago during routine interactions. How do you prove you didn't say something in a casual conversation 6 months ago? Others were about incidents I clearly remembered, but described them completely differently than I recalled. When Kenneth finished going through the complaints, he asked broader questions. Had I ever raised my voice at employees? I explained I'd used a firm tone when addressing serious issues like missed deadlines that jeopardized client relationships, but never yelled or lost control. Had I ever played favorites or treated employees differently based on personal relationships? I explained I tried to be fair, gave more challenging projects to people who'd demonstrated they could handle them, which some might perceive as favoritism, but was actually merit-based assignment. Had I ever retaliated against employees who questioned my decisions? I said I welcomed constructive disagreement and had changed my mind on multiple occasions when someone made a good argument, but I also expected my team to execute decisions once made, rather than continuing to relitigate them. Kenneth took pages of notes throughout, his expression professionally neutral. I couldn't tell if he believed me or was just documenting my version of events before concluding I was lying. At the end of the interview, he thanked me for my cooperation and said he'd be interviewing others over the next several weeks before reaching any conclusions. Thomas and I debriefed afterward at a coffee shop near his office. That went as well as could be expected, Thomas assessed. You stayed calm, provided counter-evidence where possible, and didn't attack the complainants. But Ian, I need to be honest with you. Testimony alone won't win this. Kenneth has 15 people telling consistent stories about your behavior. You're one person saying they're all lying. Without hard evidence of coordination or fabrication, he's likely to find the allegations credible. We need Natalie to find something concrete. What Natalie found over the next 2 weeks changed everything. She'd been analyzing social media connections, email metadata, phone records, and communication patterns among my team members. She discovered a private Instagram group created 8 months ago with 11 members, including David Huang, Melissa Cavendish, Thomas Fletcher, and Brittany Yates. The group was called Creative Liberation and had been active with hundreds of messages over the past months. Natalie had obtained access through a contact who knew one of the members, a junior designer named Sophie Tran, who'd recently had doubts about her involvement. The messages in the Creative Liberation group were damning, not to me, but to the complainants. David Huang had started the group shortly after his promotion was denied with an initial message that read, "Ian Thornwell has held us back long enough. It's time we take control of our own careers and get him out of leadership. Who's with me?" Other messages over subsequent months discussed strategies for documenting incidents, coordinating complaint timing, and ensuring their stories were consistent enough to be believed, but varied enough not to seem rehearsed. One message from Melissa Cavendish read, "Remember, we're not lying about his management style. We're just framing it in the worst possible light. Every criticism becomes verbal abuse. Every high standard becomes impossible expectations. Every direct feedback session becomes public humiliation." Another message from Thomas Fletcher, "I talked to Ashley. She's willing to file a complaint about that department meeting. We'll say Ian called her work pathetic. Rebecca in HR will eat that up. She's been looking for reasons to take down senior male leaders. Natalie compiled the messages into a formal report with screenshots, timestamps, and analysis of the coordination patterns. This is conspiracy to commit fraud and defamation, she explained. They systematically plan to fabricate and exaggerate allegations with the specific goal of getting you fired and presumably opening up your position for one of them. The messages also show they recruited others to participate, some of whom may not have known the extent of the fabrication. Sophie Tran, for instance, filed a relatively minor complaint about you being distant and not providing enough feedback. That might have been her genuine perception. But the core group orchestrated the entire campaign. I felt vindication and rage in equal measure. I'd been right that this was coordinated, but seeing the actual messages describing how they'd plotted to destroy my career was sickening. These were people I'd mentored, trained, advocated for. David had been someone I'd invested countless hours developing, even if I hadn't thought he was ready for promotion yet. Melissa I'd given opportunities to work on prestigious accounts. Thomas I'd defended to Gregory when others had wanted him fired for performance issues, and they'd repaid that investment by systematically working to destroy me. Thomas filed an emergency motion to compel Cornerstone and Kenneth to consider this new evidence before concluding the investigation. He also filed notice that we'd be pursuing civil and potentially criminal action against the members of the Creative Liberation Group for conspiracy, fraud, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Cornerstone's lawyers initially resisted, arguing the Instagram messages were obtained improperly and that Kenneth's investigation should proceed independently. But Thomas threatened to go public with the evidence through media outlets if Cornerstone didn't address it. That changed the calculation. The last thing Cornerstone wanted was headlines about how they'd suspended a decorated creative director based on fabricated complaints while ignoring evidence of a conspiracy. Kenneth agreed to meet with me, Thomas, and Natalie to review the findings. The meeting happened at Cornerstone's offices with Rebecca and Gregory also present. Natalie walked through her investigation, showing the Instagram group formation timeline, key messages indicating coordination, and analysis of how the 15 complaints aligned with the group's strategy. She pointed out that 11 of the 15 complainants were either group members or people the group had recruited. The other 4 complaints appeared to be genuine grievances about management style, relatively minor issues that had been filed separately but lumped together with the fabricated allegations to create the appearance of overwhelming evidence. Gregory looked shaken as he read through the messages. Kenneth's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see him recalculating his assessment. Rebecca, interestingly, looked more defensive than surprised, which made me wonder if she'd had some awareness that the complaints were coordinated, but had chosen to credit them anyway. Kenneth spoke carefully. This is extremely troubling evidence. If authenticated, it would certainly impact my findings. However, I need to verify these messages independently, confirm they haven't been altered or taken out of context, and interview the involved parties before reaching conclusions. Thomas interjected. Kenneth, the messages speak for themselves. Multiple individuals conspired to fabricate allegations against my client with the explicit goal of ending his career. That's not a matter of interpretation. It's documented fraud. Gregory finally spoke, his voice strained. If these messages are legitimate, we're looking at serious misconduct by multiple employees. Ian, I owe you an apology for not investigating more thoroughly before suspending you. I appreciate the apology, but I couldn't let it go that easily. Gregory, you and Rebecca suspended me based on anonymous complaints without giving me an opportunity to respond, without examining whether the allegations made sense given my track record, without any due diligence. You destroyed my reputation and career on the word of people who'd conspired to lie about me. An apology doesn't undo that damage. Rebecca tried to defend the process. Ian, we followed standard procedure for hostile environment investigations. When multiple employees make consistent complaints, we're obligated to take them seriously and investigate thoroughly. But Thomas cut her off. Rebecca, standard procedure includes assessing the credibility of complaints, not just their volume. A preliminary review of Ian's personnel file, which includes 8 years of excellent performance reviews, multiple awards, and positive peer feedback, should have raised questions about why 15 complaints suddenly appeared claiming he'd been abusive for years. Instead, you suspended him immediately and treated the allegations as presumptively true. That's not a thorough investigation. It's a rush to judgment, Kenneth interjected before the argument escalated. I'm going to need several days to authenticate these messages and interview the individuals involved. In the meantime, I'm suspending my investigation until I can incorporate this new evidence. Gregory, I'd recommend keeping Mr. Thornwell on administrative leave, but paid leave at this point seems appropriate given the circumstances. Gregory nodded. Ian, we'll maintain your paid leave status while Kenneth completes his review. I'm hoping we can resolve this quickly and fairly. Over the next week, Kenneth interviewed members of the Creative Liberation Group. Some admitted their involvement immediately when confronted with the messages. David Huang, facing the evidence, acknowledged that he'd organized the group and coordinated the complaint strategy, but claimed it was justified because I'd been holding back his career unfairly. Melissa Cavendish admitted exaggerating incidents, but maintained I'd actually been a difficult manager. Thomas Fletcher completely folded when threatened with legal action, admitting the allegations were largely fabricated and expressing regret for his involvement. Brittany Yates denied wrongdoing initially, but eventually admitted she'd participated in the coordination. Of the 11 group members, 9 ultimately acknowledged some level of fabrication or exaggeration in their complaints. The other 2 continued to insist their complaints were legitimate, though they admitted being part of the group's coordination efforts. Kenneth's final report, issued 3 weeks after the Instagram evidence emerged, was scathing. He concluded that the majority of complaints against me were fabricated or grossly exaggerated as part of a coordinated campaign to remove me from leadership. He found that while I had a direct management style that some employees found challenging, nothing in my behavior constituted hostile environment or workplace harassment. He recommended immediate termination of the 9 employees who'd admitted fabrication, formal discipline for the other group members, and full reinstatement of my position with back pay and a public statement clearing my name. Cornerstone's response was swift. David Huang, Melissa Cavendish, Thomas Fletcher, Brittany Yates, and 5 other Creative Liberation members were terminated for cause within 2 days. The remaining 2 group members were placed on probation with formal warnings. Rebecca Fallon received a written reprimand for failing to adequately investigate the complaints before suspending me, though she kept her job. Gregory called me personally to apologize again and offer full reinstatement as creative director with back pay for the 2 months I'd been suspended. He also offered a settlement to compensate me for reputational damage and legal fees. The settlement amount was substantial, 6 figures, designed to discourage me from filing a wrongful termination lawsuit. Thomas negotiated additional terms. Cornerstone would issue a public statement through trade publications, clearing my name and explaining that an internal investigation had found the allegations against me were false and the result of a coordinated fabrication campaign. They would provide positive references for any future employment opportunities. They would cover all my legal and investigation fees, and they would implement new investigation procedures to prevent similar rushes to judgment in future cases. I accepted the settlement, but I didn't return to Cornerstone. Too much had changed. Even with public vindication, I couldn't work in an environment where colleagues and leadership had been so willing to believe the worst about me, where HR had prioritized complaint volume over credible assessment, where the presumption of innocence had meant nothing. Thomas helped me negotiate an exit package that included the settlement amount, plus 6 months severance, and continued health benefits for a year. I officially resigned from Cornerstone 2 weeks after being offered reinstatement. The civil case against David Huang and the other key conspirators moved forward separately. Thomas filed suit for defamation, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. David's defense was that he genuinely believed I was a bad manager and was just organizing collective action against me, which wasn't illegal. But the Instagram messages showed clear intent to fabricate allegations, not just express legitimate grievances. Melissa and Thomas, having already admitted their involvement, settled quickly to avoid trial. David fought longer, but eventually settled as well when his lawyer made clear how devastating a trial would be for him. The settlement amounts weren't huge. None of the conspirators had significant assets, but they covered a portion of my legal costs and established legal record of their wrongdoing. The public exposure was arguably more significant than the legal consequences. The marketing industry is relatively small, and word spread quickly about what had happened. Articles appeared in trade publications discussing the case and the dangers of coordinated false allegations. David, Melissa, Thomas, and Brittany found themselves essentially blacklisted from reputable agencies. Hiring managers didn't want people who'd proven willing to fabricate harassment allegations to advance their careers. That reputation followed them, making it difficult to find work in the industry. Some might argue that punishment was too harsh, that career-ending consequences for what could be viewed as workplace politics gone too far was excessive. But they'd attempted to end my career through calculated lies. The fact that their plan backfired and destroyed their own careers instead felt like appropriate karma, though I took no pleasure in it. I was too exhausted and damaged to celebrate anyone's misery. Carolyn and I spent months processing the trauma of what had happened. I'd developed anxiety about workplace interactions, second-guessing every management decision I'd ever made, wondering if I'd actually been as good at my job as I'd thought. The false allegations, even proven false, had made me doubt my own memory and perception. Had I really been as fair and professional as I remembered? Or had I been oblivious to how my behavior affected others? Therapy helped with those questions. Dr. Patricia Melrose, a psychologist specializing in workplace trauma and false accusations, worked with me for 6 months to process the experience. She explained that what I'd experienced was a form of gaslighting, where 15 people had told a consistent false story that contradicted my reality, supported by institutional authority figures who'd believed them over me. That kind of coordinated distortion of reality creates profound doubt and anxiety because it undermines your trust in your own perception and memory. Patricia helped me understand that I could acknowledge areas where I might improve as a manager, while still recognizing that nothing I'd done justified fabricated harassment allegations. She helped me see that the conspiracy said more about the conspirators' character and resentments than about my actual management style. And she helped me develop strategies for rebuilding my confidence and career after such a devastating betrayal. The irony was that the false allegations did make me reflect on my management approach and identify areas where I could have been more mindful. I was direct to the point of bluntness sometimes. I had high standards that could feel overwhelming to junior staff. I made decisions quickly, which sometimes left people feeling they hadn't been heard. None of that justified harassment allegations, but all of it was worth improving. 6 months after leaving Cornerstone, I received an offer to join Davidson Creative Partners, a smaller boutique agency known for innovative work and collaborative culture. They'd followed the Cornerstone situation closely and had reached out after the public vindication. Their CEO, Helen Ortega, was frank about why she wanted to hire me. "Ian, what happened to you at Cornerstone was a nightmare, but it also demonstrated something important. You're a high-integrity person who fought back against injustice rather than accepting false accusations. You invested your own resources to prove the truth when it would have been easier to just move on. That's the kind of character we want on our leadership team." I accepted the position as their executive creative director, leading a smaller team than I'd had at Cornerstone, but with more autonomy and a culture that felt healthier. The work was challenging and rewarding, and I approached management differently, more consciously mindful of communication style and feedback delivery. Not because I'd been wrong before, but because the experience had sensitized me to how easily perception and reality could diverge, especially when people had incentives to interpret behavior in the worst possible light. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.